Hey, do you guys have any unpopular knitting opinions? Oh yeah? You don't like purling? Oh, okay. Yeah, I think a lot of people agree with you. Lillipup? You don't like swatching? Me either. I think swatching is the worst. Rocky, what's your unpopular knitting opinion? You don't have one? You just want to eat all my yarn? Mohair is your favorite? You heard it here first, guys. Are you the one stealing all my mini skeins and taking them under the bed? Yeah? It's you? You're the culprit? You're the accomplice? I see, I see. Alright, well thank you for admitting that on camera. That was very nice of you. Will you go lay down now? Hi everyone, and welcome to the Knit California podcast. My name is Leslie. I am Knit California here on YouTube and also over on Instagram and TikTok. And today we're talking about 30 unpopular knitting opinions. This is a fun video idea that I've seen plenty of other knitters and crocheters tackle here on YouTube, but I thought it would be really fun to sit down today and talk through some unpopular knitting opinions. I, of course, have my own opinions on all of these things, so my thought is I will read a statement and then tell you whether or not I agree and what I think about the topic in general. As we do this, I'm going to be knitting on my Helianthus tank, the striped version. I am at the front panel, so I'm going to be doing some knitting and purling back and forth, decreasing along as we go. So if you see me looking down, I'm either looking at this or looking at my list of questions that I've got on my phone. So let's get started. Number 1, longtail cast on is the only cast on I will ever do. Alright, well, starting off with a pretty bold opinion. Number 1, I think longtail cast on, it definitely has its uses. I'm not against longtail cast on, but I think there are some other cast ons out there that are useful and have their time and their place. So do I agree that longtail cast on is the only cast on for me? No, I don't. Number 2, tubular cast on is the worst. Do I agree or do I disagree? This one I actually agree with. So tubular cast on is the one where there are like setup rows. Anytime there's setup rows, whether it's in a cast on or a bind off, I am not into that. I feel like they're a waste of time. I feel like they're a waste of yarn, and I think they're kind of unnecessary. So tubular cast on, not for me. Number 3 is actually a question. Are any alternative cast on methods really worth the time and energy it takes to learn them? Question mark. I would say yes, I think some of them are. Some of my favorite alternative cast-ons are the knit cable cast-on, whether it's just the knit stitch, so all of your cast-on stitches look like they're being knit, or if it's the rib cable cast-on, where it looks like you've got knit, purl. But each of those cast-ons give you kind of the look of like what the Italian bind off, tubular bind off, or like a sewn bind off, what that would look like. Those two cast-on methods as well are pretty stretchy, which I think is really nice for especially the neckline of a top. So those ones, yes. Cast-ons like, you know, Jenny's super stretchy cast on. There are so many alternative cast on methods. Yes, I think some of them are worth it, but I think it's one of those things where everyone should kind of like do their own research, try them out, and figure out which ones they like best. Sometimes longtail cast on is not my favorite one to do just because of like the stretchiness factor or just how it looks. And so, you know, I've found those cable cast-ons tend to be my preference now. Number 4, magic loop, the best or the worst? Well, to be honest, I don't know if I would say magic loop is either the best or the worst. I think it definitely has its place. Is it my favorite method? No. I would rather be like, if it comes down to like small circumference knitting, I would rather be knitting in the round. But depending on the needle size, sometimes that's just uncomfortable in my hands, and so sometimes magic loop is the way to go. Also, sometimes if you have like a very, very small number of stitches, you know, you're down to like 12, 10, 8 stitches, sometimes magic loop is literally the only way to go. That kind of leads into the next one, double pointed needles, the best or the worst. I have to say I can't give a full opinion on this. I don't use double pointed needles very often. However, I have recently started to think that maybe I should invest in like a set of double pointed needles, especially as I'm coming up on wanting to get more into sock knitting. I've tried magic loop for socks. I've tried small circumference knitting for socks, and none of it really seems to be my favorite. And so I'm kind of considering maybe I should try double pointed needles. Maybe those will get me to stick with knitting socks. So I don't know. The jury for me is still out. Curious to know what your opinion is on magic loop or double pointed needles. Swatching. Swatching is a waste of time and yarn. And you know what? In my heart of hearts, I agree with this. However, swatching is kind of a necessary evil for me. I think in general, for me, I am not at a point in my knitting where I am constantly getting gauge with the yarn and with the needle size recommended in pretty much every pattern. So the way to really figure out if I'm going to be getting gauge and if I'm going to be knitting something that's going to fit the way I want it to fit based on the pattern, the only way to really do that is to swatch. Now, I don't know if I have fully gotten to the point where I am knitting swatches that are the correct size to give me the correct information that I need. And ultimately that comes down to the fact that I absolutely hate swatching. I feel like it takes me really long to make a square that's like this big. And I do think sometimes it is a waste of yarn, though I have never been in a situation where I have run out of yarn and like needed to use my swatch. So kind of, I think that's just kind of like a fear that I have that hasn't been realized. I know other people definitely have run into that situation, so not to say that it'll never happen, but it just has not happened to me yet. So swatching, it's not something that I like to do, but it is something that I will likely continue to do, especially when I feel like I need to. For some projects, I just get this feeling like I don't need to swatch, it'll be fine, especially if it's like an oversized sweater, you know, it'll be what it'll be. But other things, definitely swatching is a necessary evil. This next one just makes me giggle. Twisted rib is trash. I have to disagree with this one. I really like the look of twisted rib, especially when it's twisted knit stitches and then regular purl stitches. I don't have any issues knitting like through the back loop for that look. And I actually think it looks really good. I don't know, I really like twisted rib. When you have to purl through the back loop, that's when things can get dicey, and that's when I really start to question my decision for doing twisted rib. But when I don't have to purl through the back loop, it's totally fine. Tubular / Italian bind off is a waste of time. And this for me is like a This for me is a yes / no. Tubular bind off, a waste of time. Tubular bind off is the one where you have 2 setup rows where you're like slipping 1 stitch and then knitting 1 stitch. That, I think, is a total waste of time. You don't need to do those 2 setup rows. Just do the Italian bind off, which is the same thing just without the 2 setup rows, and you'll be fine. That's what I always do, and I think it looks great, and I have no issues with it at all, and it wastes less yarn because you don't have those 2 additional setup rows, and it looks great. Alright, let's talk about blocking. You don't need to block socks. I have not made a high number of socks. I have 2 pairs of socks that I have knit, both worsted weight. I did block both of these just because in general, like, I love blocking. If you don't know anything about me, I love blocking, and we're gonna get to that next. But I see the point of the statement that you don't need to block socks. You're just gonna put them on your feet. Your feet are gonna get a little sweaty, your feet are gonna get a little smelly, and as you're wearing the socks, I mean, they're meant to have like a little bit of negative ease, right? So they're kind of gonna stretch out as you wear them, and so yeah, you don't really need to block them. Washing them though, I would say you should probably wash them. And if you want to get a nice pretty picture of them, then maybe you want to put them on sock blockers. That's what I'll have to say about that. Okay, I take high offense to the next statement. Blocking doesn't do anything. I don't even know how someone can say that. Blocking does so many things. So obviously I disagree with that. Blocking is like magic, I think, for knitting and crochet. I have so many examples of knits that I have blocked that look so different in like the before blocking versus the after blocking photos. This one that I'm wearing, the ranunculus, like all of this lace work totally opened up, and you can see it way better now after blocking compared to before. My fully cabled sweater, sweater number 15, those cables opened up. The like columns in between the cables opened up. It looks beautiful now. My cottagecore crop, have you seen the before and after photos of my cottagecore crop? This is a top where it's knit flat and there's a button band in the middle, and there are ruffles on the sleeves and on the bottom hem. And before blocking, this thing looked like a shriveled mess. Like all of the ruffles are like rolled up, the button band is like rolled up. I had to put it on with a tank top underneath to take the photo because like it was nowhere near, like it was so rolled, it was nowhere near like closing. I also didn't have the buttons on it yet, so that was another part of that. But after blocking, it just laid out so perfectly. The ruffles folded down and looked the way they were supposed to look. The front closed and there was a clear button band. Like none of that would have been possible without blocking. And blocking in general, typically we just say the word blocking, but blocking really refers to the process of washing first and then laying out your garment and shaping it into place. So it's really that combination of the washing and the laying out and shaping that you really need to do for all your knits, or that you should do for all of your knits. And if you're scared of blocking, just look at some of the videos on my YouTube page, on my Instagram. I walk you through the whole thing. It's really not that hard. You can do it. I promise. It's worth it. The chunky sweater trend is overrated. Do I have an opinion on this? Oh, yes I do. I am not a fan of the chunky sweater trend. I don't know if I would say it's overrated. It's definitely not my favorite. However, if you are a fan of the chunky sweater trend, I don't want to take away any of your love for chunky sweaters. I have knit chunky sweaters. I have tried to wear chunky sweaters, and really it comes down to the fact that they're not for me for a couple reasons. One being the weather here in Southern California is just, I have no need for a really chunky sweater. They get really, really warm, and even in the winter, I just find I don't need that much of a sweater. And number two, I definitely think it's a trend that steers a little bit more like Gen Z at this point, a little bit younger, and that's just not where I'm at in my life. So I personally will not be taking part in the chunky sweater trend anymore. I don't think I did, but we'll just leave it at that. I will not be taking part in the chunky sweater trend. Okay. More designers should include clear instructions or links for complicated stitches, cast-ons, and bind-offs in their patterns. And to this, I say 100% yes, I agree. I think for designers, if your pattern includes any sort of cast-on or bind-off that is not the traditional long-tail cast-on, or just like a regular bind-off, or if there are any sort of like interesting stitches, whether it's like a stitch pattern, even like raglan details, different types of increases, I just think it's really good practice to include links to video tutorials or written tutorials. I mean, I think as knitters and crocheters, a lot of us are visual, and so having those video links would be really helpful. I just think that's the thing to do. I don't think every designer needs to create their own tutorials unless it's like a stitch that there like isn't a video tutorial for out there. If it is something very specific that you created like just for the pattern, in those cases, yeah, I think maybe you should try to film that yourself. But there are so many resources out there and tutorials that have already been done that you can link to in your pattern so that people know exactly what they should be doing. So yes, I agree with that one. Weaving in ends is not that bad. And to this one I say, yeah, I agree with you. I am one of those people, you may think it's weird, but I'm one of those people that kind of enjoys weaving in ends. So before I was like super into knitting and crochet, I did a little bit of embroidery, and I think the motion and the activity of weaving in ends is very similar to that motion and activity of embroidery, and it's something that I enjoyed. Also, just in general in life, I am a rule follower. I am just always one to follow the rules, and I think that weaving in ends is just like a rule that you have to follow in order to have a sweater or anything be considered done. If the ends aren't woven in, I don't think it's done, and that's just a personal thing, so yeah. I do though, when I see people wearing sweaters that don't have the ends woven in, it does make me cringe a little bit, because I'm like, it could have just, it could have been that 5% better if you had just taken care of that one thing that is not right and that everyone can see because it's hanging out of your sweater. So yeah, I'm a weaving in ends person, definitely. Seaming, it's not that bad. Oh, do I have thoughts on seaming? I feel like yes and no. I don't know. To me, seaming is one of those interesting things where I would rather not seam anything, but if I have to do something that's seamed, like, I'll do it. So I don't know if that's like a wishy-washy non-answer, but that's where I'm at with seaming. It's fine, but I would prefer not to seam if I don't have to. Oh, this next one I think is kind of controversial. At least I've seen a lot of people talk about it recently. But mohair. I'm done with the mohair trend. My thoughts on mohair. Okay, so I feel like from what I gather, mohair and like using mohair, especially as a second strand in a sweater, has really started picking up steam in the last couple of years, like kind of as a more recent trend maybe. I started knitting in 2020. That's also when I got on Instagram and really started following a lot of, designers and knitters in general, late 2020 into 2021. And I think at that point, the mohair trend had already started. So for me, it felt like, oh, it's just something that we do. Like, people use a strand of fingering and a strand of mohair in a sweater, and it makes it, really fluffy, and it gives it this nice drape, and it's kind of interesting. It's a different texture. And I really didn't start knitting with mohair myself, I feel like, until this last fall and winter. Multiple of the sweaters that I made included one strand of fingering and one strand of mohair. I did one with Surrey. I would kind of throw Surrey into this mix as well, just because of they have similar properties in being fuzzy and soft and fluffy. And a lot of times they can be interchanged for each other, right? You can use Surrey in place of mohair, you can use mohair in place of Surrey, so I would include both of them in this conversation. I've seen a lot of people recently say that they are done with using mohair in general, whether it's because of the climate that they live in, or they don't like buying 2 sweater quantities of yarn for one sweater, or because they just don't want to deal with it anymore. And I think that's totally valid. I think if you're done using mohair, like, don't use mohair. I think a lot of sweater patterns that call for one strand of mohair and one strand of fingering can absolutely be substituted with one strand of DK, and you can get the same result. And knitting with DK is one of my favorite weights of yarn to knit with, so I say go for it. For me personally, I don't think I'm done knitting with mohair yet. I have this full cubby of mohair and Surrey yarns that I think are really gorgeous that I would love to use. I did find that I wore my sweaters with mohair and Surrey in them a decent amount this like fall and winter. My sweater that I wore the most, though, did not have mohair in it, so that is something to think about and something to consider. But no, I personally am not over the mohair trend yet. I still like it, but I can totally respect if you are done with it. Double folded collars are the worst. This I find so interesting because I don't have an issue with double folded collars. And I think if you don't like double folded collars, you just don't have to do them. I definitely think there's a time and a place for them. This sweater that I'm wearing does not have a double folded collar, but sometimes I feel like the cast on edge being visible is not always the look that you're going for. I think one of the big complaints about folded over collars is that they're like bulky and kind of just like in the way, and I feel like if you do it right, it doesn't always have to be bulky. I have a couple sweaters with folded over collars that I absolutely love. I think they enhance the sweater, and so yeah, I don't have any issue with folded over collars, and if you do, you don't have to do them. But I don't think they're the worst. I wouldn't say they're the worst. There are other things that are worse than folded over collars. Okay, this next one is a big hitter. I've seen a lot of talk about this in the knitting and crochet community, and that is, I hate when people mix up knitting and crochet. I have thoughts about this, okay? So let's say you're a person who has never knit or crochet before, and you don't have anyone in your life who knits or crochet, and the only way that you really consume any sort of knitting or crocheted objects is like in the store, or when you see stuff on TV, or in the media, or in movies, and maybe that's all the exposure that you have to it. And then you meet a new friend, or you see someone out in the world, and they're sitting down and they're knitting, and that person comes up to you and says, "Oh, what are you crocheting?" I don't have any issue with, telling a person like, "Oh yeah, this is what I'm making. It's actually knitting and not crochet." Or if someone comes up and sees a sweater that I'm wearing, maybe I crocheted it, and they're like, "Oh, did you knit that sweater?" And then I can say, "Yeah, I made it. Actually, it's knitting instead of crochet, but they look very similar, and the process for making them is actually pretty similar, so it's okay that you didn't know the difference." Like, it doesn't need to be that big of a deal. If it's someone who knows the difference between knitting and crochet, sure. But if it's just someone out in the world that doesn't know the difference, like, it's okay. You don't have to get mad at them for not knowing the difference between knitting and crochet. And that's where I stand on that. And I don't find it annoying. I think if somebody's gonna come up and ask what I'm working on, even if they get the terms wrong, I'm still just gonna be excited that someone came up and asked me what I'm working on, because it shows an interest in what I'm doing and an interest in the craft that I'm making. So that to me is more important than everyone getting the terms right all the time. So disagree with me in the comments below. Okay, this next one is like a 3-for-1, and that is color work isn't fun. Lace isn't fun. Cables, also not fun. This one I think is interesting. I mean, any of those techniques are definitely a preference. I think some people will prefer color work over lace. I think some people will prefer cables over color work. For me personally, I think I enjoy lace and cables over color work, but that's not to say that, you know, I'll never do color work again. I feel like for me it's a little bit more difficult of a technique just because I feel like I haven't yet mastered it. So that's where I stand. It's definitely a preference, and people are going to prefer one thing over the other, and that's the way it is. Hand knit shorts and pants make no sense. I kind of agree with this, and I don't know if it's just like a personal thing. Like, I can't see myself ever knitting or wearing like hand knit shorts or pants, or even like a hand knit skirt for that matter. Yeah, I don't know if it's just that like I would never want to knit one, or I can't see how that would fit into my wardrobe, versus like in general they don't make sense, because I've seen like the people out there who have knit the hand knit shorts, who have knit the hand knit pants, and some of them like look amazing and some of them look very comfortable. I think the hand knit pants that Ocean Knits has made look absolutely stunning, and I think I actually could wear a pair like that, but I don't know if a pair of hand knit shorts or pants are ever in my future, and we'll just leave it at that. Opinion: I enjoy purling. Purling, I think, is a big topic and a big thing that knitters especially love to hate on. I will say the knit stitch for me is way easier than the purl stitch, as I literally sit here on a purl round. I think in general it's, you know, the first stitch that we learn. I think in general in patterns a lot of times you're knitting more than you are purling, so people have more just overall experience with knitting with the knit stitch versus the purl stitch, and it allows people to like get more comfortable with the knit stitch versus the purl stitch. But like, I'm not gonna sit here and like totally bash the purl stitch. I don't shy away from patterns that have a lot of purling in them. I'm okay with that. I think for me, the way that I look at it is, if there's a pattern that has a lot of purling in it, it's an opportunity for me to improve my purling speed, my purling efficiency, and I'm all for that. So, selfish knitting is not selfish. This one, I would 100% agree. I don't even really like the term selfish knitting. I mean, the word selfish in general just has, I think, more negative connotations. And if you're knitting, if you're spending all of this time, effort, and money on this craft, and you want to only knit things for yourself, I think that's totally fine. I mean, I think people who say, you know, you should knit more for other people, I don't know, like, I almost want to say, like, what's the point? Like, if you're spending all of this time and this effort doing something, like, yeah, if you've already, you know, knit yourself like enough things in your life, then like, yeah, move on and knit something for other people. But just for the sake of like not being selfish, I don't think that's the right way to look at it. So if you only like to knit things for yourself, don't feel bad about it. It's your craft, it's your hobby, it's your time, it's your effort, it's your money. You have the right to be spending that on yourself and yourself only if that's what you want to do. I don't like giveaways that make you tag a friend. I 100% agree with this. There are a lot of giveaways that I get tagged in, which I'm totally fine with. If you want to use me to tag me in a giveaway, go right ahead. I personally don't always like doing it because I don't know why. I get this weird like embarrassed feeling that like I'm causing a notification for someone else that's like super unnecessary. Like, how many times have you actually been tagged in a giveaway and then you went and looked at it and then like started following a new account? I don't do that. Like, I don't just follow accounts for giveaways very often, especially if I'm like not interested in that brand or that company. Like, I just won't do it. I feel like also the chances of actually winning a giveaway are super low. That being said, I have won, I think, 2 giveaways in my lifetime, which feels like very good odds. I don't know how that has happened, but it has. But yeah, I just get this weird feeling of tagging other people in giveaways, and maybe that's a personal thing that I need to look into, so I don't know. Not my favorite, not my favorite. Crochet is more accessible to beginners. This one is an interesting one. I think just in terms of like the tools and the supplies needed to start a craft, like, yes and no. Crochet could be easier. There are potentially less tools that you would need to start with crochet, like 1 hook and 1 ball of yarn, okay, versus 2 knitting needles and 1 ball of yarn. But, you know, if you're buying new supplies, like you're gonna buy 2 knitting needles in 1 set that could potentially be the same price as 1 crochet hook. So I don't know how valid that argument is. I do think, again, it's just based on preference. Like, a lot of people, my dog is dreaming out loud. A lot of people have preferences of knitting over crochet or crochet over knitting. They can do one craft, but they can't do the other. And so I think when you're learning, it's nice to kind of try both crafts to see which one you prefer over the other, or if you like both. I don't like color pooling. My thoughts on color pooling. I also personally don't like color pooling. I don't know if you've seen any of my videos where I talk about some of my finished objects. In my most recent video where I talked about like ranking my spring knitting wardrobe, that's the most recent video I have done talking about past knits. I talked about my moonset tee and how the colors pool and you get this like big swatch of like darker blue compared to like lighter blue, and I don't like it, and it's actually one of the main reasons why I don't wear that top very often. I just think it draws a lot of attention to the color itself versus the overall garment. And I guess personally, like in my wardrobe, what I'm looking for now is more items that can be worn, you know, mixed and match with other things in my closet. And if you have a sweater or a top where the color really stands out, especially because of color pooling, that's not going to be something that I can wear on a regular basis. And I think it in general just detracts from the overall garment. And so yeah, that's why I don't like color pooling. And this kind of goes into the next one, which is I don't like assigned pooling projects. I know there are a lot of like yarn dyers out there that dye the yarn where there are little like sections, segments of different colors, and then I know, for example, like the shawls where you knit the shawl, it's got like, you know, a triangle shape, and then basically the only instruction is that once you get to this color change, you do a special stitch that uses up all that color. And so then you've got like, let's just say like a cream white shawl with these like pink special stitches. Maybe they look like flowers or something. I'm just not a fan of that. I don't know why, but it's just not something that I'm into and something that I'm interested in making or wearing. And that is a personal opinion. And so if you are into that, enjoy. That's it. I'm not gonna poo-poo on that anymore. Alright, and we have come to the last one, and this is actually a pet peeve, one of my pet peeves, so I'm interested in how you think. I don't know if this is actually an unpopular opinion or not. I don't know if this is actually an unpopular opinion. Wow. I don't know if this is actually an unpopular opinion or not, but it's something in the knitting and crochet community that just really grinds my gears. And that is when a pattern designer takes and posts photos where you can't see the whole pattern. For example, if I'm taking a picture and posting my ranunculus and I'm like, look at my ranunculus, doesn't it look great? But you can't see my ranunculus because my hair is covering the entire front of the sweater. Your hair is not what people are wanting to look at. The sweater is what people are wanting to look at. Even a necklace in a photo, a pattern photo, can cover what people are trying to see. So please, to all the pattern designers out there, when you're taking photos, give us the close-up, give us the far away, give us all of the images of a pattern so we can actually see what it looks like and how it fits on your body or the model's body, so that we can decide if we like it before we purchase it for ourselves. Get your hair out of the picture. And in saying that, I'm going to bring my hair back into the picture, because it's not really about my sweater right now. It's just about unpopular knitting opinions. So that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching. I am curious your thoughts on all of these knitting opinions. So if you are following along with each of the statements and you have your own opinions, please go ahead and leave them in the comments below. I would love to hear them and see where we agree and where we differ on some of these. Again, remember, I gave all of my personal opinions, and if your opinion is different, it's okay. It's just an opinion. We can agree to disagree on some of these things, okay? Again, thank you so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you on the next one. Bye!